you see everything okay? I think, yeah. So what I will talk about is the geochemistry of light hydrocarbons, especially methane in different geological settings. So we will see methane can be present in different settings, starting from volcanoes to sedimentary areas, and also uh, on some specific unique systems. Yes. So in petroleum geochemistry, what we call seeps are the surface manifestations of fluids, especially hydrocarbons, methane, ethane, propane, and so on. So here are some examples from Romania where we have everlasting fires as dry seeps, small to medium or large mud volcanoes, but also methane as a gas can be found in carbon dioxide emissions, diffuse degassing, carbon gases, mineral waters, or dry mofetas. We will see it's methane appears in such a wide variety of geologic settings, it's sometimes difficult to classify them. Ethiopia in 2017 made a really nice cartoon on where they can be found. So we can go from mid-ocean ridges until continental um, settings. For example, volcanic geothermal systems, we can find methane in sedimentary basins, in ophiolite, in mid-ocean regions. However, there's a big difference on the origin of these. I would like here to talk about what are the different origins of methane. For example, we can have microbial, thermogenic, abiotic. What is the difference between these three? So microbial and thermogenic, we can group them as biotic methane or a biotic source. It means that as organic material was sedimented in the surface and going to the subsurface slowly as the sediment layer becomes thicker, the first stage is when microbes start to let's say eat the organic material and produce hydrocarbons, first going to light hydrocarbons like methane, ethane, propane, and then going to higher ones. Usually in microbial gas, we have really light until butane, pentane, benzene. Then thermogenic, or when methane is when you have a, a deeper sediment layer and due to the higher geothermal gradient and the pressure, everything is decomposed, degraded, the organic material to methane due to the thermal decomposition. And the third one, which is quite new in the last 10 years, became quite popular in the geochemical community, is the abiotic methane. It means that there's absolutely no sign of organic material from which it's produced. It's pure from chemical reactions in the system. For example, in volcanoes, you can have CO2 plus water vapor producing methane and oxygen molecules, or in land-based serpentinization systems, you can have methane plus hydrogen, CO2 plus hydrogen, sorry, produces methane and water. So this is the question, how do we differentiate the different types and based on their genesis? So here we use the stable isotopes. So here they come really useful. So let's go in the volcanic setting. Here Orlando showed quite the different manifestation types. An important thing that I want to say here is methane appears in the hydrothermal systems already, in the hydrothermal aquifer of the volcano or around the thermal springs. In the main fumaroles, crater fumaroles, or in the pure volcanic gas, there's absolutely no methane, nothing. So this is where methane appears the first times. As Orlando showed, fumaroles, bubbling pools, thermal springs, they all can have already some methane. In post-volcanic systems, we can have really nice um, manifestations which are cold compared to the other system, the hydrothermal or the volcanic system. So we can have, this is examples from Romania. So we can have caves filled with volcanic gases, we can have carbon gases, mineral waters, or bubbling pools or mosetas with high CO2 content. However, also here we have different percentage of methane already present. A simple way to differentiate in these settings, it's very simple. Like in volcanic system, you have high temperature, about 100 degrees. You have acidic gases, and we have almost none or really, really low methane content. Usually, this methane, if we sample these higher temperatures, are due to atmospheric contamination of the samples. It's really rare to find methane in pure volcanic gases. In the hydrothermal systems, you have the boric temperatures, which Orlando also mentioned. You have no acidic gases, you have reduced sulfur species like H2S. The main gas is CO2, and you have higher concentrations of methane. As you go to the colder regions of the systems or to dormant volcanoes or post-volcanic manifestations, everything is in ambient temperature. You have no water vapor, of course. You still find the reduced sulfur species, and you have high methane content, but you never have such a high methane content as in concentration to be higher than the CO2, because CO2 is the main gas species. However, there are some specific cases that we will see later on. So the first thing, geochemists really like to use the isotopes of methane, carbon-13 and deuterium of the methane. So here we can see the areas where the isotope, if a sample, we measure a sample, this is the regions where they plot if we measure the different uh, stable isotopes. So we have the so-called biotic range, which I was talking about, the microbial gas and the thermogenic methane, and they can mix, of course, because it's never a closed system. It's always an open system. In the abiotic part, for example, this, you can have different, uh, in the abiotic part, it's worth mentioning, it's not the formation, how it's formed the methane, is the geologic settings that is plotted. For example, volcanic geothermal is in this region, land-based serpentinization or olophyolitic gas are here, and crystalline shields are here. For example, a Canadian shield, South Africa, and so on. So if we take some gases that we measured with some colleagues from Romania and also from Italy of the Ciomadu dormant volcano in Romania, we can see that methane, these red plots, are quite in a, they overlap a bit the thermogenic region, but also they are quite clustered. If we compare them with other gases from or other regions from volcanic system, for example, Pantelleria in Italy, or the Tyrrhenian Basin in Italy, they're overlap. So it means that this is quite what happens in nature. This is where hydrothermal or methane in hydrothermal or geothermal systems can be found. It's worth mentioning here the EPR, the East Pacific Rise. This is a marine environment where gases are coming out. This what geochemists call the pure volcanic end member, due to this being the less affected due to sediments or other secondary processes or to fractionation. This is what we call the most pure volcanic methane or geothermal methane that can be found in nature. Also, in volcanic system, as Orlando and also Fatima mentioned here, we can do also some geothermometers by using the methane, the CO2 ratio, or and the, for example, the CO and the CO2 ratio. So we see these plots that are based on if there's a liquid phase or a vapor phase in the system and different temperatures, because these are temperature dependent. However, we must take into account that depends when we do the geothermometers depends on the redox condition of the system. So for example, this plot is the same, however, it's shifted due to what redox conditions we use. This plot uses the Gigenbach redox condition, minus 2.8, if I'm uh, not mistaken. The other one, he uses the Amoran Panici from the 80s redox condition, which is calculated from the concentration of oxygen in the system. Recently, for example, Sano et al. In 2018 started to use to see methane stable isotopes uh, and methane concentration and combining them with helium. So helium ratio. So here we can see methane divided by helium-3 and the carbon-13. And he said that, okay, we have the microbial methane, we can have the thermogenic, and we can have the so-called uh, volcanic if you use the ant member at the specific rise. However, we must be really beware, let's say it like this. This is not always true. It really depends on the system. So this plot or these ratios cannot be used in a continental system. Let's say it can be used in only if you have a subduction system. For example, Japan, Indonesia, and going on the Pacific Ring of Fire. Then this plot works. However, if we go to other geothermal systems where there's no subduction, it it doesn't work so good. So you can plot your data, but it's not correct to explain it in this way. And now we go to the sedimentary systems. So again, here we can have different manifestations. We can have cryo-emissions like everlasting fires or eternal flames, how they are called. In Italy and in Romania, we can have mud volcanoes. These mud volcanoes are totally different from the ones that Orlando showed, which are influenced due to a volcanic system. This is called sedimentary system with no volcanic activity, and we can have also methane-rich springs that if you're lucky enough with the lighter, you can light the water up. Also, in this case, the best way is to use stable isotopes. For example, this is a simplified version of the shore plot that we've seen, only taking into account the microbial and the thermogenic region. It's yes, for example, the thermogenic region can be the more enriched in deuterium, the more mature the gas is. In hydrocarbon exploration, maturity of the gas means that it's a dry gas having the main gas species is methane followed by ethane propane and not other hydrocarbons, higher hydrocarbons. This is what we call dry gas. In hydrocarbon exploration, it's also really important to see the composition or the ratio between different gas light hydrocarbons. For example, the Banner plot is a really good proxy to do hydrocarbon exploration. So if you have the concentration of methane and ethane and propane, you can do the so-called Bernard ratio, C1 divided by C2 plus C3, and the carbon-13 of the methane. This, they use it in hydrocarbon exploration. If you have a seep on the surface, you measure it. Sometimes you have a well somewhere around and you have a gas composition from there, but you don't have the carbon-13. If there's a high or a good flux, so really strong bubbling, really strong flux of gas, then it's presumed that it's the same gas that you can find in the subsurface. So it means that, okay, we can make a borehole here and we can extract the gases, the hydrocarbons, the light hydrocarbons. However, if, for example, this here. Uh, uh, Sorry. For example, mud volcanoes. It can be really good to see the low fluxes are not the best to see the hydrocarbons. So these two plots are really used in the samples, the hydrocarbon exploration. Also, if you want to go in more detail, I won't insist on this. We can do maturity plots combining C1 and C2, carbon 13 from ethane and propane, or ethane and methane. So these are more hydrocarbon related uh, models to see how the gas was formed or from which organic material. Was it formed from marine sediments or from terrestrial sediments? What kind of plants were they formed, and so on. So we can have, for example, methane in hybrid systems, so-called sediment-hosted geothermal systems. These are really quite unique sites. We can see there are a few in the US, a few in Europe, and a few across the Pacific Ring of Fire. So what it means, so we can have the volcano, we have sediments, and we have the hydrocarbon prone area or the sedimentary area. However, in between, the sediments can be affected due to the geothermal systems. It's basically an interaction of a volcanic and a sedimentary system. However, in this case, the main gas is CO2, they're CO2-rich gas. However, the methane is produced from the um, degradation of organic matter in the sediments. So effectively, the volcanic fluids or hydrothermal fluids press these sediments. They also have these fluids are warmer or have a higher temperature and degrade the organic matter to produce methane. In this case, methane is in lower concentrations than in the hydrocarbon prone areas, but in higher concentration than in the volcanic system. So it's a unique system that we find. This is a hybrid system. Procesi et al. In 2019 did really a nice paper on how these systems are functioning and how they work and where we can find them and how we can differentiate between if we measure the carbon 13 of CO2, methane, and other components. For example, which is really important in the volcanic hydrothermal system and the sediment-hosted geothermal systems, CO2 is always of volcanic or thermometamorphic origin. So there are also some extreme cases, as Orlando was mentioning, that are fractionated. So, for example, this is a small mud volcano that has the highest, one of the highest nitrogen content in the world, 92%. So this kind of nitrogen content in mud volcano sediment areas we find in the Caribbean, in Trinidad, Tobago, and I think one or two in the US, where the main gas is nitrogen. Then we have methane. Then we can have helium and other associated gases. However, in these cases, due to being nitrogen, deuterium and it's really fractionated. So this is an extreme value that we find in nature, plus 124 per mil, which is way over the whole diagram that we are showing. But due to knowing the fractionation processes that can occur, it's possible to recalculate which is the original um, uh, carbon and deuterium content of this gas, of this hydrocarbon. These are extremely rare cases that we can find in nature. However, we found these. And the thing is that if you don't know how, what Orlando was saying, how you sample your gases and how fractionation occurs, you can misinterpret your data. So another interesting unique systems are methane ophiolitic systems. So ophiolytes are the remaining of or subduction zones where the subduction stops and everything is abducted. So the subduction, uh, let's say, really old systems. There are only a few sites in the world. So here you can see on the map the different sites. In green are all the sites that gas composition was measured, isotopic composition was measured. All the other sites in blue, red, and violet are the ones that not everything is known about the gases, or only gas composition is fine and no isotopic composition. So in this system, we always find ophiolites or peridotites on the surface. For example, Chimera in Turkey has these really nice eternal flames, like burning for thousands of years. And the methane has the isotopic signature tells us that there was no organic material in the production of this methane, only chemical reactions, water rock interactions. In the other cases, the majority of the cases, methane is found dissolved or as free bubbles in hyperalkaline springs. Hyperalkaline springs are the ones that you find with pH in these systems with pH between more than 11 usually. So really hyperalkaline. Also here you can find it in really specific geologic settings. However, in this case, if we see the composition, it's a unique composition because you have the three main components are nitrogen, hydrogen, and methane. So in the majority of the cases, it's a mix between hydrogen, nitrogen, the main two components, and methane appears as secondary component. Only in two cases in the world we found, or the other authors found, the hydrogen and methane rich system, which are mainly continental, like Turkey and the Philippines, continental in brackets. Hydrogen, it's really important because you can find it in percentage, meaning 15 until 70% hydrogen in the free gas that is coming out. If we see the same shore plot, but a bit modified, we can see that it can have gases sampled from here can have a bit of mixing between biotic gases, but the main system is here. So everything is plotted more or less here. A few years ago, this area was the main, that everything was in that area. It's in operatic systems. However, when new data emerged and uh, better isotopic compositions were measured, we can see that it's a much bigger region that it's seen before. So here, what's important is carbon 13. It's really enriched, let's say, compared to biotic gases, and it's depleted in deuterium. Usually, these systems are extremely low temperature systems, usually in the subsurface where we say the kitchen for the methanogenesis is found. It's, let's say, maximum 100 degrees. So if you have the carbon, the deuterium of the hydrogen, of the water of the system, and also of methane, you can do some isotopic equilibrium geothermometers to see what is the temperature. So these are all the plots from the world that have all these three components, and none of those components are above 100 degrees. So it means it's a really low temperature system. However, if we try to combine it with the helium to see the helium values, we can see it's all over the place. So we can have, for example, in Japan and the Philippines, you have mantle source of some heat that can influence it. With Japan and the Philippines, and all the other are more crustal. This is really important to see the system. If it's hybrid systems, it's close to the subduction or to a volcanic area or not. And the helium and nitrogen isotopes are really good proxies to see the system in more detail. Another interesting system is in granitic intrusions or cratons. This is for the last 2 years or 1.5 years became really important due to it's another unique system compared to the ophiolitic gases, how some of us are calling the, the gases found in hypoalkaline waters. It's totally on the other side of the spectrum. Here, what is abundant is nitrogen and crustal helium, and the gases are enriched in deuterium carbon-13, the methane. So in this case, the crustal helium can go up to 2 up to even 5 or 10% in India. So this is in free gas. Usually in nature you find it a few ppm, a few parts per million. However, here you can find percentage of helium. This is extremely rare. So if we see like a ternary diagram to see the nitrogen, methane, helium, we can see it's a mix of all three components, mainly nitrogen and methane, but also quite high amount of helium. If we do the same shore plot, a different version of it, we can see this was the old abiotic range. Somewhere here is the volcanic geothermal, somewhere here is the ophiolitic, and here are other parts. This is cratonic. We call it cratonic gases because it's totally on the other side of the spectrum. So it means that it's not so enriched in carbon-13. However, it's extremely enriched compared to other gases to deuterium. Other proxies that we use here is also to see the helium. So in this case, all the gases are mostly crustal in the helium content, and the nitrogen 15. So the nitrogen 15, it's between, have always positive values, and between nitrogen per helium ratio between 10 on the fourth and on the third or until the second. This is roughly the range. Helium here is almost pure crustal, right? On the other side, nitrogen is cratonic. Cratonic is used for a year or so. It means really old sedimentary systems or continental crust, where you find extremely old sediments. Also here they did radiocarbons, some scholars, and seen that compared to recent sedimentary system, there's huge time difference, geologic difference. So as a conclusions, we've seen that methane and associated right hydrocarbons can be found based on different geological settings all over. How we can differentiate between the different origins from biotic to abiotic and microbial. Sometimes if we see a system, we go and sample and see the data, things are not always as straightforward as they seem. And it's important when using gas and isotopic compositions, we need to take into consideration the specific geological settings. It's not always so clear. Okay, we have a pure abiotic or pure microbial or thermogenic and so on. So thank you for your attention. And if there are any questions that you would like to ask. So I unmuted the microphones. Any questions?
Okay, I may ask a question, Artur. So I know I have used myself this hydrogen water methane hydrogen plot as well to determine the formation temperatures. But of course, hydrogen is quite tricky that it's quite easily equilibrated. So what's your opinion on that issue? How likely is it that it's just a later equilibration process at lower temperatures that's causing the trend?
Ooh, yeah, this is a good question. The problem is that in these systems, there are only a few who have measured correctly the hydrogen. Sometimes what in, on the surface when we sample, some people just take a bottle, take the water, do the dissolved gases. However, not taking into consideration the free gases, because there can be a fractionation between how much hydrogen, methane is in the free gas and the dissolved gas. Yes, hydrogen can re-equilibrate really quickly. So what I do personally, I take the water separately for the deuterium of the water. Then I take separately a trying to get the dry gas phase from the side using for the hydrogen and the methane. So, and I try as soon as possible to send it to the lab to do the analysis. Because if we wait, then there could be an exchange between the methane in the gas phase and the hydrogen in the gas phase. So usually I try to do it, or I talk to the lab before, look, in 1 week you will have a sample, put it as soon as possible in the MS, the spectrometer, to do the isotopes. Usually it's in 1 week I have the results for the deuterium and the carbon and the deuterium of the methane. Then I wait for the other analysis. I try to use as short as amount from the sampling until the lab to be short in 1 week. This is how I do it usually.
Yeah, thank you. That is probably really good to preserve the sample and to avoid post-sampling effects. But of course, there might be also some equilibration in the formation itself.
Yeah. So we always try to use it as good as we can to do and as quickly as we can.
Thank you.